thank you so much for joining us for our next Ripple Ventures Tank Talk with partner at True Ventures, Tony Conrad, to discuss being a nomadic entrepreneur and his people-first approach to investing. Now, just a little bit of a brief background on Tony and his extensive career in venture and investing. Tony has been a partner at True Ventures for over 16 years. The firm was founded in 2005 and is one of Silicon Valley's top-rated venture capital firms that invest in early-stage technology startups. With over $2 billion in assets under management, it has helped create over 10,000 jobs worldwide. Prior to that, Tony co-founded and was the CEO of About.me, which was acquired by AOL. And prior to that, he also was a co-founder of Sphere, which was also acquired by AOL. Before that, he was the director of M&A for Groupe Danone, where he lived all over the world for over 8 years. Tony's investment portfolio includes companies like WordPress, Zero Fasting, Blue Bottle Coffee, MakerBot, VoiceFlow, Pluralsight, Slack, Automatic, and Lowercase Capital. On the personal side, Tony is a board member of the Tony Hawk Foundation and is the former T40 National Co-Chair of Technology for President Barack Obama. Welcome, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to kick things off and talk about your nomadic entrepreneurial experiences. Some of the random jobs that I know you've had, Tony, include being a baseball umpire, a pharmacy stock person, a high school sports reporter, a bookbinder and glue machine operator, janitor, and college newspaper ad salesman. And you've also lived in places including New York, New Delhi, Jakarta, Chicago, Paris, and obviously now San Francisco, where you're based. So I'd love to hear about how your nomadic life experiences have helped you become a better investor and a partner during your career.
Oh my goodness, in so many ways. I grew up in a small farming community in Indiana, and not a lot of kids where I grew up, went to college or left that area. I think in my graduating class, we had 9 kids go to college out of 122. So, I think when you decide you're going to bounce from that kind of environment, you find kind of a zest for, urbanism and things like that, right? So I was thrilled to be in Chicago and make my way to New York and then kind of continue around the globe. I think the biggest thing I learned that has helped me, definitely to be a more patient investor and also to have much more empathy with those people that, I get a chance to work with, is I just remember my own struggles, right? During, the transition, even from Indiana to Chicago, that was such a massive transition for somebody like me who had really only been in a big city a few times. And so, I remember looking up at my office building the first day, and it was, like a 40-story building. And I thought, damn, this is going to be, am I ready for this? But, of course, you're always more ready than you think. But, by the time I got to Paris, and I remember in particular, really, really, really struggling because my French speaking ability was decent, but it wasn't, it really wasn't fluid in the way that you need to be, right? So, they kind of had some ideas of what to do with me, but ultimately I just had to take a step back and take a big deep breath and then go talk to them and tell them what I needed. And I remember like a little light bulb going off. It was like you have to be assertive. And you have to be, respectful. And if you can take a step back and help people to articulate what it is that they feel they need instead of projecting onto them what you think they need, that is incredibly valuable, I think. And so it's something that I try to do with the entrepreneurs that I work with, is to really kind of get into their mind and figure out how to be helpful to them. That's the goal. That's the primary responsibility in an early stage investment.
Right. And it sounds like those humble beginnings of you growing up in a farming community in Indiana, probably seeing the world in different lenses in Jakarta and Paris and New Delhi, it made you really empathetic, really, towards just people and their life's journeys and the way that they were brought up and the different experiences and opportunities they had. So it almost made you want to peel back the onion a bit deeper to understand where this person was coming from and why they maybe thought this way before passing judgment. If you came from maybe, say, a big city where you thought you kind of maybe knew or saw everything.
Yeah. I think I've always been empathetic. I think I did a great job of figuring out in my community, right, my farming community, of how to fit in. And not, even though you're noticeably different, you're academic, you're striving to kind of move on. I knew from the age of like 5 that I wasn't going to live there, right? But, I never hated it. I always kind of loved it. And it wasn't a disadvantage at all, right? I maybe had an unfair advantage from an educational perspective and a viewpoint perspective. But the environment that I grew up in was incredibly nurturing. The community was incredibly wonderful.
Yeah.
And so I was always thankful for that. It taught me a lot about empathy, from an early age on, of how not to be the person with a little bit too much hubris, and to figure out how to blend in. But I think, so I always had that, I think I always had that capacity, but I think what really kind of maybe set it apart was a level of curiosity and drive, around that. And, kind of a real openness to just kind of like, okay, well, what do you got to offer me or throw at me? You want me to go to Jakarta? Okay, I'll go to Jakarta. I'll learn another language. I'll figure it out, right? And after a while, it just made me feel very confident in my abilities to walk to the cliff's edge and just kind of take a step over and realize I wasn't going to fall into the oblivion. And
Right.
so that's helped me tremendously as an investor, as you
Right.
can imagine.
Well, let's talk about walking towards that cliff's edge. I mean, your founder first experiences are what you probably had the closest with walking along the edge for a while before becoming a full-time venture investor and partner. So can you tell us a bit about your experiences of becoming a 2-time founder with back-to-back exits to AOL?
Yeah. The very first time I did it, even though I had been involved in our community, I'd actually been a successful investor, starting off small individually, and working with a smaller firm that no longer exists, but I'd been fairly successful at it. But in 2004, I felt like, it was a good opportunity maybe to try to do one myself. The reality was I actually didn't have enough courage to do that. I had courage to have the idea, and the curiosity to have the idea, but the idea of actually, doing it, I really hesitated. And I was very fortunate in that I had been on the board of this cool company called Oddpost, which was one of the first DHTML based, or Ajax is what we called it then, companies that was a bit of a darling on magazine covers and all that kind of stuff. But the CEO is my good friend, Tony Schneider, who's also my partner at True Ventures. And Tony really, for lack of a better metaphor, kind of held my hand through the process and gave me a level of confidence that really enabled me to take the plunge and become a founder and actually do it. And then from there, it was like I had the bug, but I also had the stomach ulcers, not literally, but figuratively, like, the roller coaster aspects of it, of making a lot of mistakes, of hiring too fast, having too high of a burn, then having to retrench and realizing you got to let a lot of people go, and that sucks. And, all the highs and lows of that. And then, finally it culminated in a wonderful, tremendous outcome with AOL wanting to buy the company. We ended up having, I think, 5 different offers from all the big platform players, Google, Yahoo, or just whatever. Everybody wanted to buy the company because it had become quite a thing. Then, I went through the AOL process and I started learning about exit terms and indemnification and things that are important to investors, even though I had been an investor and never really thought about it that much. And I had to actually walk the deal off the cliff. And, that was like so heartbreaking. I was just like, I had to literally, say no. Said, like, there's a couple terms in here that we just won't sign up for. And the deal went quiet for 2 months. And that's a long 2 months. You're thinking like, damn, I had that. And all we had to do is agree to some shitty term and we would have been in good shape.
Yeah.
But we didn't. And 2 months later, it kind of came back. And as good deals do, and if you have a good company, it'll come back. And then we quickly honed in on those two issues and fixed them, and then we exited. Yeah.
It sounds like that's like a lesson in so many things, like patience, perseverance, retrenching, tightrope walking, whatever you want to call it. But first, kudos to Tony Snyder for pushing you into that world of being a founder. A lot of VCs who've never had founder experience always say they live vicariously through the founders. But until you've gone through that founder journey of the highs and the lows, and probably a lot more lows than highs, you can never really experience it. And you got to experience it twice over. So I guess I would love to hear, now that you kind of got through those acquisitions, were there some traits that you maybe yourself, exemplified, or that you now see or believe are most common among successful founders?
Yeah, I think you have to be, what I have noticed, that the founders that I think have excelled the most, they do have this commonality around them that they can be the face of the brand and the product that they're creating. It's generally, it's one person, right? And that can be hard. And, both of my startups, we were 3 founders each time. And, but I emerged as the face of it, and everybody was comfortable with that. And so I do think that is something that is incredibly important. It doesn't mean that you're a salesperson. It just means that you're an evangelist for the idea, right? And it has to show up in all aspects: external communication, internal motivation, but it also for recruiting and bringing partners and getting the right kind of level of press coverage, and all of that really, I think, requires you as a founder to say, I can't outsource that. You might be able to do that a little bit more in certain categories, maybe enterprise, SaaS, things like that. But I think even that has changed. Like, I think people want to see a face, I can name the faces of, some of the biggest, Stuart Butterfield at Slack, or Collison Brothers at Stripe, or Matt Mullenweg at WordPress. We know the faces of these people. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, it's funny. I never really learned the difference between a CEO and a president until I started seeing what startups were doing. Because for me, I always thought CEOs were just making all the decisions, but really their goal was to be an evangelist, a salesperson for the entire company and the brand. Whereas a president was sort of like the COO, internal, chef in the kitchen, managing everything else at back in house. And that's why I start to realize how, you even have taught us, being co-investors with you in VoiceFlow, the way in which the CEO has to exemplify the community that you're building with your users and your employees and stuff like that outside of the organization, just not with inside of it. And I think there's an example we have here, and I'd love to kind of learn a bit more about this example. Blue Bottle Coffee, everyone knows it. It was definitely something way out of left field, probably for a traditional venture fund. But I'd love to understand what convinced you to take a chance on Blue Bottle Coffee, which was a retail coffee chain, given that 99% of True Ventures investments are in technology companies.
Yeah, it's a couple things. First and foremost, the person standing next to me, Brian Meehan. Brian was not the founder, but Brian and I were doing this deal together, and Brian was going to assume a role as being the founder, James Freeman, as partner. Meaning he was going to be operational, and James was going to continue to be the CEO and founder of the business. But Brian was going to come in and really partner with him and bring a level of operational excellence. And so, Brian and I had been friends for a while, and I had a tremendous amount of respect for him as we were going into that deal, even more respect for him as we've come out of that deal. He's a tremendous operator. He knew how to walk into a room with what I'll call soft footsteps, but assertive footsteps. And he knew how to be a wonderful, wonderful partner to James. Ultimately became the CEO of Blue Bottle. And that was something that he and James worked out in a really positive, easy flow way. And so, Brian being involved with it first was the first indicator for me. The second one was that I knew Blue Bottle. I was myself a connoisseur of coffee and a bit of a nerd that way, and actually knew James from the farmer's market. He just knew me as a customer, but I knew him as like God. he was doing liquid gold for me in the morning, and so I would see him down there on the Saturday mornings, and so I was really familiar with the brand. And then when I looked at the opportunity, when Brian told me that there was a possibility we could invest in this company, he and us, it took me a few minutes. He'll tell you, I said to him, I commit 5 million right now. And I think I did say that within the first 5 minutes. What that meant was I got a 5 million call, and I'm going to do some diligence now. let me do some gut check. Interestingly, it was probably the largest first check that we had ever written in a company. And it was a non-tech company. So
Wow.
$5 million check actually ended up becoming like 6. And it was a big check for us. But it was kind of common sense. Like, I looked at it, the beauty of what they were doing, this artisanal based coffee, to me was here to stay. I saw it happening in Portland. It was happening here. It was happening in LA a little bit, and then sporadically in other cities, urban environments around the country, and also worldwide, right? But like in New York, there's maybe 3 Blue Bottle-esque type cafes, like in total for the entire city when we did this investment. So what I was betting on, or what we were betting on, was that every place in the world where there was a Starbucks, which was basically everywhere, if you were to set up one of these artisanal based cafes, it didn't have to be Blue Bottle. It could have been Stumptown or 4 Barrel or Cyclass, somebody else. How would have it done? And the answer is it would have done incredibly well, right? That I knew. I just instinctively understood that. The consumer experience was very different, that consumers like myself, and certainly a younger demographic, millennial-based consumers, they want, origin of story. They want higher quality experiences. They want simplification. There's just so many things that Blue Bottle just kind of nailed. And I just said, like, listen, the scale of this opportunity is 5 to 10% of the market cap of Starbucks, which meant kind of like a $5 to $10 billion market cap company. And, sure enough, we built $1 billion business here. So we did really well with this.
I'd say you did pretty well. Did it have a harder sort of bar to cross with the partners or anyone because it wasn't a growth tech company? Did you look at it differently with the metrics you were trying to, compare it against, or was it not that?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, it was a bigger check. So that meant, we actually wrote a report. Which was like, whoa, we're going to write a report. I'm not even sure I remember how to do one of those, an investment report, because we felt like we owed that to our LPs, right, if we were asked, and also for ourselves, right? And it was great. It was a great exercise to go through. But, in a lot of ways, it was just a bigger check, but it adhered to the same kind of filters that we were looking through. Great founders, great brand, obvious hole in the market, big TAM, daily, consumption patterns. Once you have somebody come into your cafe, and if they love the offering, they're really honestly not going anywhere else. I mean, yes, everybody will dip into a different cafe here and there. I still do, right? But yeah. Ultimately, I always come back to Blue Bottle for my daily habit, so to speak.
Wow, fantastic. Well, I know that, that person, Brian, exemplifies a lot of the True Ventures portfolio and your people first approach to investing. There's been obviously over 10,000 jobs created, so you definitely have a way with people. But over your extensive career as a venture investor, you must have developed some type of pattern recognition when analyzing founders. So do you have any requirements when betting on founders or founding teams that you consistently rely on? Alternatively, are there other non-starters that are just deal breakers for you?
No, the founders I work with are all very different. They have different personalities for sure. Some are much more, extroverted. Some are more introverted. But they all have to have that ability to be the really kind of rise to the occasion and be the guiding force and the face of the brand. I look for, just by nature, I don't want a lot of drama. And so I don't know who does, but like, I just, I got a kind of a no drama rule. I got to really feel like I have a good rapport with this person or people. I have to feel like, I'm never gonna, when they call me or I call them, that neither one of us is going to look at it and go like, oh, damn, I got to talk to that person, I never want that to happen. So I spent a lot of time, I think Braden and the team at VoiceFlow would, certainly Braden would be able to speak to this, but, we spent a lot of time just talking and really trying to get to understand what made him tick. To me, that's the privilege and the awesomeness of being an early stage investor. You get to look at that stuff and kind of really only that stuff, and then measure it up with the uniqueness of the idea. What's the potential TAM, because a lot of these markets like Fitbit didn't exist when we did that. And I think that's really, really the fun part of this that's different than what you have to do when you're a Series B or C or D investor, where it's numbers, right? So yeah, I'm looking for people that I'm going to work well with.
Yeah, that authenticity factor of getting to know the person. I can definitely see, the way that you guys handled the process with Braden, when you guys led the seed round after us, you definitely took a lot of time to get to know Braden and see what made him tick. He told me he came out to your house and you guys sat there and just talked. And that's just, that's sort of the way we think about things at Ripple as well, is sort of like, you're not just betting or trading this person's company. You are in it for the next 10 years. So you better get to know each other pretty well, pretty fast, because it's going to be a long ride.
Well, with Braden, I was just kind of holding him hostage. I knew he was in San Francisco. I knew he was here. I knew he was going to close a deal. I knew he was talking to a lot of investors. So I put him in an Uber and had him come like an hour and 20 minutes outside of the city to my house.
Just wouldn't let him pitch anyone else for the rest of the visit.
And then I kept him there, and then we had a handshake on a deal, and then I drove him home.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I know you really like community-driven companies such as WordPress, such as Zero Fasting, and obviously VoiceFlow, which we co-invest together in. Do you have a favorite to community-based companies more than others? And if so, how come? Do you feel that they have a stronger moat than traditional startups?
Oh my goodness, I think they have a much stronger moat. I think that I learned this first and foremost with the gentleman up there in the top of the slide, Matt Mullenweg, founder of Automatic, which is WordPress. And, it was the first time I was down in Austin, Texas, and this is maybe at South by Southwest 13, 14 years ago, right? When WordPress was, 5 people or something. And I was there with Tony Schneider, who became CEO for a period, like a 7-year period with Matt. Matt's now CEO, and Tony's taken a different product role in the company, which is awesome. But I walked out of a session and I just like, where are you guys going? They're like, hey, we're going to just come with us. We're going to go to a meetup, a WordPress meetup. And I'm like, oh, okay. And as I was walking over there, I realized it was going to be like 250 people or something really. It was like, maybe 200 people, 300 people, whatever, a lot of people. And we got there and I'm like, so you guys are hosting this, or we're hosting this? And they go, no, the community's hosting it. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, like I've never even met the person who's putting on the event, right? And that to me, it was like, oh my God, I get it. Open source and community-based, platforms are just amazing if you can get them to work, because you have so many people rowing in the same direction. It creates such a kind of forward momentum. It's just awesome. And so when you think about something like VoiceFlow, it's early days, right? They're the pioneer in this amazing kind of voice, technology space. And, it'd be really easy just to like fall into a trap of just like being very insular and just thinking enterprise, enterprise, enterprise. But like, it'd be such a huge mistake, for us. Like, we need to nurture that community because there's so many devs out there that in their spare time or as part of their job want to tinker, they want to learn. One thing I learned about devs is devs like to develop, period. Like if you hire a great engineer and you don't have them writing code, they're going to be miserable quickly, right? They want to experiment. They're just curious that way. And so I think that there's this incredible opportunity early on with individuals to become our evangelists for the product, to help guide the product direction, to inform us on what we're doing. And it's just amazing. Zero fasting, another one where we just have tremendous leverage by having a community. So, it is something I actually really do spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't have an open source thesis driven investment plan, but like I really do look for that.
Yeah, I definitely learned that from you just sitting in our board meetings and hear the way that you've experienced communities, power companies, even though, maybe there's no sales associated with it. Maybe there's no customer use cases you can really lean on types of investments. There is a power of the community that you just can't put into numbers at the early days. And it is a fine line between, using your community to your advantage, but also, not turning your back on the community as well to appease maybe some other demands within the company. And you've obviously figured out a way to do that with obviously Automatic first and now with others. So I really do love that theory you have about the strong remote with community-driven companies. So keeping on the WordPress angle, you've obviously been on that board like WordPress, which has gone from a garage startup to powering over 30% of the internet's websites. I'd love to learn how your role as an investor has changed as the company has scaled over time.
That's a great question. I think your role has to change. In the beginning, the role is incredibly, especially with a young founder, which is the case with the team at VoiceFlow. It's like the advantage they have. But they have a lot of stuff though that you just got to be patient because they need time to learn it, absorb it, and all of that. So I think your role in the beginning is, to be, incredibly supportive, to establish a foundation of trust, of dialogue, of honesty. Like if you can't get those things, established in the beginning, like if you're not the first call when there's the oh shit moment, or you're not the first call when there's something to think through, or you're feeling, I don't know, you're just feeling badly or like whatever it is, like if you're not one of those first calls, then as an early stage investor, then I think somehow you've gotten off track and you've lost a little bit of sight of the plot. As the company grows though, you have a real responsibility around governance. You have a real responsibility around pushing with confidence, sometimes your CEO or founding team, to hire people, to get them to be comfortable with hiring people that are much more impressive than they are on paper. And it's pushing really, really hard. You have a responsibility to getting into planning, into budgets, to holding people accountable, holding the team accountable, all in a very positive way, not like as a taskmaster and a scolding type of way, but like, okay, hey, listen, we totally missed our quarter. What, why'd that happen? And what are we going to do about it? Right. It's just the role just changes so much. And in fact, WordPress, I think, is a great one. I just got off the board. I was on the board for 14 years.
Wow.
I think I should have been off that board probably a good 5 years ago. And maybe even, a little bit further back. Because somebody like what Matt, ultimately, he's so capable. Matt as a 20-year-old founder is not Matt as a 35-year-old CEO. And, it's not like if I were to meet Matt today, could I join his board and be a real positive influence, right? And dig into the mechanics of the business and all that? Absolutely, for sure. I'd be a fresh voice. I'd have fresh energy. We'd have a fresh relationship and all that. But when you've been working with somebody for, 15 years like that, at some point in time, it's not that, I'm not accusing Matt of tuning me out, or me like, not, or mailing it in, but it's just, I just think like, you need a new energy and you owe it to yourself. And so one of the conversations I proactively had with Matt over time was, why don't we transition me off the board, and why don't you transition somebody else into that role who's going to provide very specific skill set that can help you now and for your next level of growth. And Tony, you're somebody who's been your investor, you've been your mentor, you've been, he's been my advisor, I've been his, he's been an investor in my company. And ultimately we're just friends. It's like, I could still play an advisory role to you in the background, right?
Right.
And that's, it's great. So anyways, so far so good. We've had 2 board meetings since I got off. I've been to both of them.
You're not off.
But I do love it. I do love it at the end when they say board only.
Yeah, in camera. Yeah. It's interesting because it kind of goes back to that, that patience and that empathy, because you're right, at the beginning of the journey with an early stage founder, we're a pre-seed sometimes too. So these are very early days. You're almost acting as a therapist, a bit of a best friend, a partner, but also you have to be a strong arm investor sometimes to tell them the bad news sometimes. But you're right, it's sort of like a long process of trying to, shorten the gap between where you want them to be when they're at that 35-year-old Matt Mullenweg and when they're at that 21, 22-year-old Braden. And you just got to make sure you carry them through each stage of the way, but know when to kind of slide in and slide out. And I feel that I'm going to probably slide out of some of our roles as well, but I'm not going to be, quiet. I'm probably going to still get those, therapist calls.
I think we should, as an industry, I think this whole notion of you get a board seat and you're locked in. I think like the board seats should actually have a 3-year term limit on it. And it doesn't mean that you can't both re-up, but I do think there should be more of a formal mechanism for making it less awkward to have boards become dynamic and to really be much more beneficial, to the founder while maintaining kind of our fiduciary responsibility.
Right. The fresh voices in the room always seem to bring a different angle. So absolutely. Well, let's talk about that in terms of True Ventures, because, your team is absolutely dynamic. As I mentioned earlier, 2 billion in assets under management, extremely impressive track record. But one of the many things that differentiates True as a larger fund is the lack of partner attribution for deals. Why is that such a competitive advantage in your eyes?
No deal attribution. So, it's a funny thing, deal attribution. It drives weird dynamics, both externally and internally. So does everybody in our team know that John Callahan did Peloton? Of course. Like we all know John led that investment, or, Paneet led Duo Security, or Adam led the Ring investment, or like, each person's got like, I feel like now I should give attribution to each one of them, right. One of the great deals they've done, because like each person has done an amazing deal on the team, right? And we all know that internally. But what we don't do is we don't broadcast that to our LPs. We don't put it in our decks when we're raising our funds. They ask for that level of detail and we kind of push back on it, because all that ultimately matters is that partner A or partner F may have different performance. One might just be absolutely crushing it, and the other one just, still in kind of a wait and see kind of mode. But it doesn't really matter because we as a firm are doing really well, right? And it's just an environment where there's a collective, kind of understanding that we all play a role in each deal that we do. Did we win Duo Security who I never met in the process, Doug Song and that team. Did Paneet partly win that because of the work John, Phil, Tony, and Ohm and I had done on WordPress,
Exactly.
right? Did that help us win HashiCorp? Did that help? Yeah, it's like how do each one of these things, help us each time we have an exit, big exits, right? It helps us to win the next deal. It makes us a more viable investor or candidate, for VoiceFlow. So, the no attribution stuff is really important to us, that we not forget that. Having said that, everybody kind of knows, like certain deals, that person did this and that. We don't submit our names to the, to all the
minus lists and stuff.
Yeah, and all that stuff. Like, it's a dirty secret for all of you listening. The Midas list, you really have to submit your name and your data. And so, we just don't do it. Having said that, I'm pretty sure we have several people on our team that would be on that list.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% agree. So obviously, you mentioned WordPress, Peloton, Duo Security, some of those like big name flags that you have hanging above your office. And many VC funds have theses that are particular to industries or business models. Yet True Ventures thesis revolves around people. And because of that, you've backed some amazing companies from WordPress, Peloton, and Duo Security. What was the thinking behind this thesis, and why do you think it's such an advantage for you guys?
Oh, I think it's a huge advantage. So first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with having a thesis. Like, there are investors on our team who have much more of a thesis around a specific sector. And then there's somebody like me who has absolutely zero thesis. I promise you, 2 years ago, I did not wake up and say, oh my God, voice is the next big interface shift. Right. And I've got to go find a company in this space. That is not at all the way that I invest. But, so some people on our team might be driven more like that way. But for us, I think it is about empowering each person on our team to play to their strengths and their instincts. I think we have really great athletes and we shouldn't overcoach them. And it doesn't mean that there's not some coaching. We all get coaching from each other and from external sources, but like, I think it's really important that we empower each one of us to follow their instincts and to do investments that fit to their style, right? So like, I'm really comfortable investing in young founders. I get a lot of energy out of it. To me, it's really, it's fantastic. And I have a good rapport typically with really youthful founders. So, I like that. It's something I look for. I like brand more than probably other people. I put much more value on that. We talked about, I really love community-driven platforms. Like that is really important to me. So there are things I'm looking at, but, there's no formula per se.
Yeah. I think the only thesis I've heard about for True is that, most businesses will, maybe when Phil started in 2005 and stuff, could be started with $2.5 million.
Well, there's definitely that thesis. So while we don't maybe have a thesis around sectors, and that's served us really well, because there's no way like we would have said, hey, we're going to become biotech investors.
Right.
And yet, 7 or 8 years ago, and today, we're the lead investor in Zymergen, and Zymergen is a massive company. I mean,
right.
As big as any of these right here. But we do have a business model thesis, and we're really clear about that. And we're really open and proactively, forward in discussing it with prospective investments. And that is that we invest between $1 and $3 million. We want to be the first check. It comes with a board seat typically. And it is, tied to 20% ownership metric. And I think, if a founder is going to, turn us down because of the valuation or the, whatever, then they probably, we probably weren't a fit for them in the beginning, and it probably is just fine.
Yeah. So, you've told me, offline some of the companies that you had to pass on because of that I guess, thesis around structure. Has there ever been a time where you thought about being flexible around it? Or you're saying, for all the ones that we've missed out on that became big successes, we can point out, hundreds that have been true successes to what we believe is right.
Yeah, I think, we had an opportunity to be an Instagram or an investor in bourbon. At least we were in the discussion mode. Kevin System, the founder there, had worked for me at Sphere when
Right.
he'd interned with us. He was a student at Stanford. So he later becomes the founder of Instagram. So obviously we saw it, and I love Kevin and would have loved to have been an investor, but we couldn't get anywhere close to our metrics. And the same time frame, we did Fitbit, and we ended up owning 22.5%, I think, for our initial check. But there was a moment where, James Park, the founder CEO, came back to us and wanted us to do about half of what we were going to do. And so we would have ended up around 12 or 13%. And we just said no.
Right.
And we just, and all in the same time frame. And so, we ended up owning 22.5% of Fitbit. It went public. We made $1 billion plus return for the fund on, I think, $6.7 million of total invested capital.
So that made up for the Instagram pass.
Yeah. And the Instagram thing, we would have made $100 million,
Yeah.
if we'd done the 10% deal or
Something like
$50 million. So yes, sometimes you're like, Trust me, I would have loved to have been an investor with Kevin. Because I love Kevin, and it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'd love to move on to my favorite part of the talk, which are book recommendations. And you've put forward 3 book recommendations here. I'd love to hear about each one of them and why you love them.
Well, I think Shackleton's boat journey is, if you haven't read it, is just one of the most heroic. In fact, 2 of these books, the bookends here, are really kind of heroic figures or stories of just like courage and just really a level of optimism to be able to kind of get through the reality of a really nasty situation. And so they kind of pop out to me, one, because I just finished reading The Splendid and the Vile. In fact, I just took it out of my I literally just took it out of my backpack, finished it yesterday. But Shackleton's journey is about Shackleton who's trying in pursuit of discovering the South Pole for England and putting a flag stick there. And it's quite evasive and ends up missing out on it, but does a subsequent journey. And I think their boat gets stuck in an ice pack. I haven't read it for like 20 years, but gets stuck in an ice pack, and they float in the ocean in this ice pack for 20 months. 20. And he had a full crew of men. Like literally they can't leave. And just when you read this book and how they finally were able to get out of the ice pack, and the fact that he got the entire crew back home. Every single person, did not lose one person in this journey of 20 months. I mean, there was no external food sources, nothing. I mean, it's kind of just amazing story.
Incredible.
Perseverance. So great for founders to read. And then Bird Lives. It's just, I love books that are, they're nonfiction, but my God, you put it down and you just go like, what the heck? Is that really true? I mean, so Charlie Parker, it's a book about Charlie Parker. If you're a jazz buff, considered probably the greatest jazz musician, in the world. And he's just a terrible heroin addict. There's a lot of things about his story and his pursuit, but it's a fun dip into the dark world of jazz in the 1940s and 50s, for sure. Wow. And then the last book is, it's about Churchill, and it's about really how you can both be such an amazing leader and also be such an irrelevant leader in a different moment that's kind of right next to it.
Right.
Churchill famously becomes the prime minister of England as it was entering into the war with Germany. And I think we owe the 20th century probably to this particular individual. At least the Western world does, for sure. Just a phenomenal leader who was then voted out of office. I want to say 4 months after the conclusion of the war, because, he was an amazing wartime president, but he was not a great, builder in a lot of ways, right? So these are just, I read all the time.
I think Splendid in the Vial is a great read for founders too, to talk about being in the trenches, getting through the tough parts. And then, if you get voted out, let's say as a CEO, you're not the only person it's probably happened to. It's happened to one of the most famous people in the world. So it definitely has some good life lessons for that. Well, Tony, before we finish off, I always love to ask for any final words of inspiration for our audience.
Well, in this moment that we live, this particular moment, no matter where your politics are or whatever, I think this is like a phenomenal moment where not only are you creating your business, but the entire macroeconomic environment around us and social environment around us is being recreated or has an opportunity to be recreated. And I just think like what we're doing in our day jobs is such a small little piece of the big puzzle here. And I just kind of hope that everybody realizes like the value and the beauty of like taking a step back, taking a little focus off your company and making sure that you're having a more holistic experience as a human, and that you're figuring out where you kind of side on some of these social and, economic issues, and be a participant, not an observer. I think it's really, really, really important for each one.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us in the tank today, Tony. I've already learned so much from being on the board with you at VoiceFlow and our conversations on the side. I look forward to having more of these in person when we can meet again in person. So Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.